So here we are in part three, and I apologize, but I'm recording this on Canva so that I can show all of my slides, which I have been working on to create hopefully a very comprehensive and detailed explanation that will help people. So, anyway, talking about the Merkaba and how the two dimensional static representation of it is not really it makes it difficult to activate it as a living star tetrahedron. And the inversion seal was used to trap the Merkaba spin ratio into a distortion and a reverse spin instead of the correct ratio. And so organic Merkaba is a dynamic spinning energy body. It is not a static symbol. And so the paper only reflects the shell of the true energetic structure because it's the movement that's so important. Also, the Merkaba is those are the two forces of creation. All creation is magnetic and electric. Magnetic principle is the feminine, electric principle is the masculine. It's it's action. And so the two together, that is the energy of creation. And so if you really think about it, it actually does make sense. You need to embody all of what it is, and just a simple piece of paper without really any true knowledge or awareness of that entire energy behind it definitely is just a it's just a fragment of what that means. So it's a shell. It's a shell of a structure. And just using these two-dimensional hexagram symbols was popularized in occult and Masonic circles, and also then adopted by the New Age systems without really understanding any of this. And so, in many cases, it can act as a sigil that locks the light body in to that metatronic death spiral, which is a disconnection from source. So, the proper, and again, this was what made me realize that I needed to dig a lot deeper. As a hypnotist, I am very focused on wanting to help people break out of mind control. And that was actually what led me to, before I even really got so deeply into the spiritual upper layers of all of this, I was looking into, I want to become a hypnotist because I want to help people break out of these mind control patterns that I can see they are stuck in during the COVID. But anyway, I've been very interested in the way that the CIA and occult groups and influences have done experimentation on humans and essentially siphoned people's psychic gifts. So I've made a deep study of the Montauk Project, about MK Ultra, and also about all of the programs behind it. I'm very interested in Laura Worley's work, for instance. She works actively to help survivors of these mind control programs to release all of the programming and to heal. And so I pay attention to the information that comes out from people who have realized that they are survivors of this programming, because a lot of times it takes a long time to realize and to recover the memories. But I was hearing more and more that people were describing the hypnosis that they underwent while they were being programmed in these mind control labs, my labs. And they described the tool that was used. And they remembered it, and they spoke about it in interviews because it was such an inversion. So if you guys think about when a baby is born and don't people tend to look for, if it's a little boy, give him blue, and if it's a little girl, give her pink? Well, the people in the mind control programs were being hypnotized, and the female was blue and the male was red. And so that was a sign that if mind control is deliberately trying to either a our perception as a society that blue relates to the male and red relates to the female, either that's an inversion, or this technique that is being used to program people for mind control is the inversion. What is it? I began digging into that and discovered that people were being mind controlled in the reverse. Blue is the masculine, that represents the masculine creative life force, and gold represents the feminine creative life force. And so the Merkaba magnetic pyramid that comes from the earth and that forms half of the Merkaba energetic vehicle that we all have, that this is part of our auric field, that is gold. It's not pink. It's not blue either. And the masculine is the blue. And so if people under mind control are being programmed in the reverse, that's putting people that tend to be victimized for mind control programs are people that have natural, accessible psychic abilities, because that's the purpose of using these people. It's to siphon and hijack their abilities and to force them to work on behalf of the few and the few's agenda. And so, again, that whole thing falls back into the service to self polarity that we're talking about, which has its roots in these spiritual systems that came to us from Atlantis. And so putting that psychic energy, the ability of these individuals who already have those gifts, putting that out there into the collective has been feeding distortions in the perceptions that people have of gender. And so just think about that. But anyway, we're going to move on. I just happened to tie those concepts together, and that's what made me go and dig deeper. And in doing so, going really deeply into chelantic science in particular, because that provides precise mechanics of ascension, precise technologies, and it it mirrors the teachings of what Rudolf Steiner discussed. He didn't get into the technicality to anywhere near the degree that chelantic science does, but it definitely mirrors the same concepts, and Rasha as well, Dr. Jerry Rivera Dugenio and his work. All of these things line up. And then I myself tried it, and yes, there was a huge difference, a huge difference in my energy field, a huge difference in how I felt during and after, and it was long lasting. And so this is what I recommend to people. If you have been doing something that you discover was inverted, or you weren't aware, once you discover, you can never unknow what you know, and once you discover the correct way, then, well, first of all, you should explore to actually find what is the truth, and to be open to the idea that perhaps you were wrong in the past, perhaps you were misinformed, and there's nothing wrong with that at all, because we are human and we are here to learn and discover and to evolve. And part of learning and growth is recognizing when the old information really is not relevant and we need to change. And so we do change, and then we up level, and that's what people need to do. And a lot of that involves going and looking for additional confirmation, finding more information. Don't just rely on one source. If you get all your information from your own, let's say you have a connection with some channeled guide, where would it hurt for you to go out and look up research, see what, the teachings of Rudolf Steiner perhaps have to say about whatever that is. Look into alternatives that are pure, that have, that the fruits which have revealed them to be true, which are over time have been shown to be service to others. Look for confirmation in these things. That's what I'm saying. Okay. Spiritual bypassing. This is another huge part of the New Age deception. And what is that? Well, it's avoiding shadows and uncomfortable truths in favor of positive vibes. So again, this would be refusing to look for validation and only taking it from one source. It's not wanting to hear anything dark, not wanting to participate in anything that's going to bring down the vibration. Lots of buzzwords, lots of rhetoric that people have put out there to move people away from confronting and facing truths that are not pretty. The What was that saying? That the greatest deception that the devil ever managed to essentially pull over the human race was to convince them that he's not real. Regardless of whatever concept of the devil, whatever that means to you, what it really comes down to is if you can't look into the abyss because you're too afraid to see those eyes looking back at you, you are potentially putting yourself in a place of perhaps mortal danger, certainly spiritual danger, and if nothing else, you're not going to really get anywhere as far as spiritual growth with consciousness. It's very important to face all of everything light, dark, and everything in between. Using light and love to ignore and to suppress and not deal with real pain, real fear, real anger. Blindly following people, teachers, gurus, guides, without really curating that information, and at the very least, sitting with it. Ignoring red flags that signal distortion and come to you from intuitive knowing. I'll give you an example. When I was pretty newly awakened, I really loved this couple that did so much, what I thought was such amazing spiritual teachings, Eldora and Simon. I loved them. And as time passed, they became more and more commercialized. And that bothered me because, that was a complete shift away from everything that they had talked about earlier. They were very organic and crunchy granola type people. And then, next thing we know, there's hair, nails, and makeup and all this polished stuff, showing off bags from all of these very high end places, these people that are traveling and jet setting, going and creating retreats, but they don't really have any income because they're just trusting completely in everything, that everything's going to be provided. And then there's these weird signs that kept triggering me. And I ignored the signs until there was a video that I listened to where Simon was talking, and he named it. The video was called The Voice of God. Now that right there gave me a chill, because Voice of God technology is a mind control program that basically piggybacks on frequency that is used by CIA, DARPA, whatever, the agencies that are all about experimenting on humans, and always with the goal of winning wars and spreading the empire farther. Whatever. Voice of God is a technology. It's a real technology. It's not a theory. This is a real thing. The name of the video was that. And during the his lecture, in this video, he was talking about having had a communication with a channeled entity, whatever it was, Ra or something, allegedly, that came to him and told him all this that he needed to share. And in there, he said, "We have come to reap humanity." And I said, "What? Did I just hear that?" So I paused it. I went back. I played it again. I heard it again. "We have come to reap humanity." I played it 4 or 5 times, and that's what I heard. And so then I put in a comment and I just said, timestamp, whatever it was, "Can you please confirm what you said? Because it's not clear. I'm not really hearing it." There was never any response. Those 2 signs right there were enough for me to say, I need to step back from listening to what these people are saying. Well, shortly after that, I began learning from people that used to work for them, because more and more people were coming out talking about what a nightmare experience it was, how their whole purpose was to, get their employees to be very, very loyal and focused on them, and to even, not pay attention and disconnect from their families, and just, really culty sort of experiences, and a lot of material harm that came to these people that work for them. And so that's just what made me realize, wow, I was right. Much as I loved them, much as I just thought, what they're saying resonates so much with me. I love their messages. What they were doing and the signs that I was getting in my intuition were what told me I need to pay attention to that and let go of, as much as I identify with what they're saying and I love their message, I need to not focus on them anymore. And so that's what I mean by don't ignore the red flags. If Jesus has been talking to you for all this time and you're getting these little weird sensations, or you're getting a vision of a Trojan horse that's coming in for some reason, who knows why, signs like that, you need to pay attention, because that is a sign that your higher self is trying to get through to you. Fan worship and idolization is a big red flag. And reliance on presenters who don't understand the material that they're delivering. There is one YouTuber right now that she's very glamorous. She's absolutely gorgeous. She speaks in such amazing galactic history, is getting a bigger and bigger following all the time. But everything that she's saying, I can tell, is not hers. She's reading a script. She's not familiar with it. And the way that I know this is because she will repeat contradictory statements of the information, presenting information that contradicts itself within the same video, and doesn't recognize that. So if you're not familiar with what you're teaching, you're not going to necessarily identify when something that you just said, which is a complex sort of a complicated concept, you might not necessarily recognize that you just said something that actually contradicts what you said earlier. And so that is a red flag. Those type of things, pay attention to. Don't just dismiss it as, oh, that's not important. Right now, there are so many people out there that are making videos that are teaching all of these spiritual concepts. It is up to you to be discerning. Laziness around self-work, neglecting the physical body, and spiritual hygiene and critical thinking. This is a huge, huge spiritual bypassing mechanism. If your physical body is contaminated by pharmaceuticals, by fluoride in the water. Fluoride is actually in just about every commercially produced food and drink that has water in it, because fluoride has been added to the water supplies of the places where these companies are making their products. And of course, it's not disclosed. That's a real problem. That calcifies the pineal gland. Anything that has if you have any sort of an endocrine disrupting condition where your thyroid's not working properly, or your adrenal glands are off, you are not a clear channel, because the endocrine system is the physical organ that connects to the chakra system, which is our energetic. It generates our energetic field. And so anything that is going on with the physical body means you are not a clear channel. That comes down to spiritual hygiene. That is going to block you from being a clear channel for divine information. People don't realize it, but so much comes back down to the physical body. It could even be that you are hearing Jesus, but you've got 5 or 6 different prescription meds that you've been taking for years. And prescription meds block and clog the pineal gland, as well as they mess with the endocrine system. So you're actually contaminated. And so if you're not a clear channel, what is coming through is not necessarily going to be the highest frequency. So people need to pay attention to that. And this is a hard thing for people to hear. But nevertheless, you must, if you are really and truly committed to wanting to raise your consciousness, you absolutely must focus on your physical body. You must detox. You must clean up your act. You must clear away any residual damage that has been caused by the contamination in our environment, which most particularly is coming in through food, through water, through drugs. All of these things create imbalances and prevent you from being the clearest channel possible. And that absolutely is what allows discernment. Addiction to false euphoria. This goes back to what I said before, bliss states that are ungrounded in real healing. That is a sign. If you do not feel the grounding in your internal central cord, especially the warmth right in your central core between your solar plexus chakra and your heart, if you don't feel that as well, and all you feel is this euphoric state of bliss when you're listening to someone doing a guided visualization, chances are you are actually receiving bombardment from something that is not true Christ consciousness. It's going to be potentially with a very strong potential that it's false. And also confusing resonance with trauma bonded energy as truth because it feels familiar. And this is something that many, many people fall into. Another one is people saying it's the message that matters. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to look into where it's coming from. It's the message that resonates with me. It's the message which is all about raising consciousness, service to others, health and healing. It's a beautiful message. This is a huge bypass that's very common in New Age circles. The belief that the content of the message is more important than the originating frequency, the entity source, or the energy mechanics behind it. Many well-meaning seekers and empaths fall into this trap because they trust how the message feels in the moment, and they ignore the long-term effects or the deeper signature patterns behind it. Messages are often loving, wise sounding, and emotionally soothing, and that's a very easy thing. They can still lack true Christic alignment. And so if you assume that if a message is speaking about peace, light, unity, it has to come from a benevolent source, this allows these non-Christic entities, including falling consciousness, synthetic intelligences, and hijacked ascended master archetypes, to interface with your auric field without recognition. The frequency of the origin is the message in multidimensional terms. Words can be mimicked. but frequency can't. And many false light systems mimic Christic language while embedding subtle control codes and savior programming, or just simple energy siphoning. When discernment is bypassed, the auric field is left open to false hosting. And that means the individual unknowingly becomes a mouthpiece or an energy channel for these service to self consciousnesses. And there are energetic and psychological effects over time, gradual disempowerment. It's masked as spiritual, raising of consciousness. My guides told me I don't need to worry or to investigate. They'll take care of everything. Attachments to the emotional highs that come from channeling and bypassing trauma healing or inner mastery work. And over time, this will result in an increased dependency on a messenger, a guide, an ascended master, some source, which can lead to covert spiritual possession patterns. Some ways to detect it are, a lot of times they don't identify themselves. They don't clearly identify. And the individual would just say, well, it just came to me. I didn't ask who it was. It just felt loving. So there's no challenging. Now, even in the New Testament, in the Christ teachings, Christ said to always challenge. Messages are often laced with universal platitudes, but they don't really give practical embodiment tools. And a pushing back on someone that's bringing these questions up and encouraging people to, defensiveness and shaming, oh, you're being judgmental, or, that's actually coming from a deep wound from, feminine persecution. No, to shame someone else for encouraging discernment is definitely a spiritual bypassing mechanism. See it in yourself if that's what you do. Real Christic beings do not bypass sovereignty. They do not bypass inquiry. They do not bypass consent. They encourage full transparency. They can stand up to scrutiny. For instance, if when I went searching for the Merkaba mechanics, if what I had been doing was correct, I would have been able to find that, but I did not. The message and the messenger cannot ever be separated. The frequency architecture and integrity of both need to align. This is really important. Some other consequences of spiritual bypassing is repetitive cycles of unhealed patterns. You just keep going through it. You think you're doing something, but over time you realize you've just been stuck in a loop. Spiritual growth becomes shallow and you become more and more disconnected from the self, denying true emotional, energetic integration. And it also will result in getting stuck in reincarnation loops and soul recycling traps because you have abdicated your responsibility for increasing discernment. Also, it can result in, and it very frequently does, with over-identification with your ego and with your spiritual identity. Potentially, in Rudolf Steiner's world, he would say that you run the risk of being trapped in cycles of materialism that could result in being bound to earth, an earthbound spirit. And of all things, teaching others distorted teachings that you haven't vetted, that's something that's a real responsibility that people need to take on, especially if they are a teacher. It's our responsibility as teachers to teach the purest and most correct and most aligned with source information. And also, doing this over time can result in burnout and becoming black-pilled when the deception just becomes undeniable.